He is a global spiritual leader, a scholar, a peacemaker, a writer, and a poet. Revered worldwide for his teachings on mindfulness, he remains a humble Buddhist monk, most at home in the stillness of nature, surrounded by his community. Thick Nhat Hanh has written over 100 books, read by millions worldwide. Martin Luther King publicly nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize. But how did this unassuming seeker from central Vietnam confront the horrors of war and emerge as a spiritual pioneer, bringing the Buddha's teachings to the West to become a force for change in the world? Thick Nhat Hanh was born in central Vietnam in 1926 under French colonial rule. Even as a child, he was aware of the political instability and turmoil in his country. At the age of 9, he saw a picture of the Buddha on a magazine cover and experienced a deep desire to be as calm and peaceful as that Buddha. When he was 16, he became a novice monk at Tu Hu Temple in the imperial city of Hue. There he began Zen training and meditation, while also tending buffaloes and working in the rice paddies. He soon mastered classical Chinese and French and devoted himself to the study of ancient Buddhist texts. He lived through the Japanese occupation and the Great Famine that followed. Whilst many of his peers turned to foreign ideologies and violence, he was determined to find another way to liberate his people from suffering.
Buddhism was very old when I grew up, and yet I had the belief that if we can renew Buddhism, we can help many people. That is because I had learned in history that there were a period of time that Buddhism was able to help to restore peace. It's my conviction that if Buddhism could do that in the past, it can do that in the present moment if we know how to renew Buddhism, to make it a living tradition again.
As a young monk, he took the name Nhat Hanh, meaning one action. Determined to renew Buddhism, he became one of the first monks of his generation to study science, literature, economics, and English. He soon realized that monastics must offer society more than just chants and prayers, and developed a vision for engaged Buddhism.
Suppose you are meditating in a meditation hall, and if you hear the bombs falling around, the meditation hall has not been hit by a bomb yet. You are safe. But since you are meditating, you are aware that the bombs are falling and destroying houses and people around the meditation hall. And you know that you cannot just continue to sit in the meditation hall. So you get out of meditation hall in order to help people. And that is called meditation in action.
In 1954, as the communist North and anti-communist South vied for dominance, Vietnam was divided and violence raged. He meditated intensively through this time of grief and despair. Only when he discovered the practice of mindful breathing in an ancient text did he find the key to heal his suffering. He expanded the practice to develop a new way of walking meditation, combining the awareness of breathing with each step. These practical methods for handling painful feelings became central to his life's teaching and have today been taken up by people all over the world. He and his friends established a mountain refuge where they could restore their spirits. They called it Phuong Boi, fragrant palm leaves. They realized that only by coming together as a community, close to nature, could they resist the oppressive atmosphere of anger and despair and sustain their efforts to renew Buddhism. It was during this time that Thick Nhat Hanh met a young biology student pioneering a new approach to social work in the slums of Saigon. Inspired by his teachings, she went on to become his lifelong collaborator, later receiving the name Sister Chan Kong. After just 4 years, deadly fighting reached Phuong Boi. Thick Nhat Hanh and his friends were forced to abandon their sacred refuge, and their dream evaporated like a cloud. In 1961, as the war continued, Thick Nhat Hanh traveled to study and teach at Princeton and Columbia universities in the United States. It was a time of respite and healing from the horrors of war. His meditation deepened, and he touched the possibility of true peace, freedom from hatred, fear, and sorrow in the heart of the present moment. He later described his insights there as the first blossoms of awakening. When South Vietnam's oppressive Diem regime was overthrown, Thick Nhat Hanh was called home to help guide the Buddhist peace movement. Soon he became a leading light in this non-violent third force that refused to take sides in the conflict. He and his colleagues founded a publishing house, a university, and a leading Buddhist journal which printed 50,000 copies every week. The journal reported on the protests and published his peace poems. They were taken up by well-known singers of the day and were sung in the streets.
This is a poem I wrote during the Vietnam War. Tonight the moon and the stars bear witness. Let my homeland, let earth pray. For Vietnam, her deaths and fires, grief and blood. That Vietnam will rise from her suffering and become that soft new cradle for the Buddha to come. Let earth, my country, pray that once more the flower blooms. The radio of Saigon, the radio of Hanoi, the radio of Beijing begin to attack the poems because they are calling for peace. No one wants peace. They want to fight to the end. I have suffered a lot. I have known what is the war. I have seen brothers and sisters dying. And I myself escaped death in a very narrow way.
In 1965, Thick Nhat Hanh and his colleagues established the School of Youth for Social Service, a non-partisan Peace Corps training thousands of young people to go into the war-torn countryside to rebuild shattered villages. But it was dangerous work, and several students were targeted and killed.
We followed a program for rural development. We created community schools in villages. We work with orphans, war victims, and I can say that we learned from many teachers, and among these teachers, our own suffering, our own difficult situations.
In February 1966, Thick Nhat Hanh created a new Buddhist order. Today, the order has over 3,000 members worldwide.
The Order of Interbeing was born as a spiritual resistance movement, and it is based completely on the teaching of the Buddha. And if you read the first mindfulness training, you know that this is the practice of non-attachment to views, freedom from all ideologies. This is a direct answer to the war. The first mindfulness training, aware of the suffering created by fanaticism and intolerance. We are determined not to be idolatrous about or bound to any doctrine, theory, or ideology, even Buddhist ones. This is the lion's roar.
In 1966, determined to change the situation, Thick Nhat Hanh once again left for the U.S. to raise his voice for peace. He was supported by many influential spiritual and political leaders of the day, including Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He knew that if he could persuade Dr. King to come out against the war, the tide of public opinion would change.
Somehow this madness must cease. We must stop now. This is the message of the great Buddhist leaders of Vietnam. Recently one of them wrote these words, and I quote, "Each day the war goes on, the hatred increases in the heart of the Vietnamese, and in the hearts of those of humanitarian instinct. The Americans are forcing even their friends into becoming their enemies."
In 1967, Dr. King nominated Thick Nhat Hanh for the Nobel Peace Prize, saying, his ideas for peace, if applied, would build a monument to ecumenism, to world brotherhood, to humanity.
In Paris, on Avenue Kléber, politicians have been talking for 4 years about ending a war. Once a week, on Thursdays, diplomatic cars arrive at the conference center, bringing delegates to talk about a war in which nearly 1 million men have died, the Vietnam War.
But Thick Nhat Hanh paid a high price for daring to call for peace. He was prevented from going home, beginning an exile that was to last 39 years. He said, "I'm not inclined to be a politician. My vocation is as a monk. But as a monk, you have to have the courage to speak out against social injustice, the violation of human rights."
We are talking about the people in Vietnam whom I know. Those people who are dying every day, who are suffering every day. I am talking in their, for their sake. And if you want to ask me the question as what they want the most, is that you stop bombing, you stop the killing, you stop the killing.
In 1974, he wrote a meditation manual to guide his young social workers back in Vietnam and help them resist burnout in the chaos and tragedy of war. It was the first book to awaken the West to mindfulness, becoming a spiritual classic translated into over 30 languages. By 1978, the plight of Vietnamese refugees fleeing the communist regime had become a major humanitarian crisis. In Singapore, Thick Nhat Hanh and Sister Chan Kong rented 2 ships and rescued hundreds from the high seas. They began looking for a place where they could help Vietnamese refugees heal from the ordeals of war and exile. They found land in the south of France, which they named Plum Village, after planting over 1,000 plum trees in the fertile ground. Word spread that Plum Village was a place to deepen meditation practice and receive the Zen master's direct guidance. Intellectuals, artists, social workers, and activists traveled there from around the world. He led retreats in America and Europe and nurtured many of today's leading mindfulness teachers, pioneering a new way of communicating Buddhist teachings.
You walk, you do it as if you are the happiest person in the world. And if you can do that, you succeed in walking meditation. Because we do not set ourselves a goal for a particular destination, so we don't have to hurry. Because there is nothing there for us to get. Therefore, walking is not a means, but an end by itself.
But he soon came to realize that only lifelong committed practice and the trust of a student-teacher relationship would lead to lasting transformation. And so he founded a new monastic order, which would go on to become the largest Buddhist monastic community in the West, and a touchstone for the mindfulness movement that would soon sweep the world. Responding to the growing demand for his teaching and practice, by the early 2000s, the Zen master had established monasteries in Southern California and New York State. These were followed by centers in Vietnam, Mississippi, Paris, and Germany, and later in Hong Kong, Thailand, and Australia. He saw that in order to transform violence and fanaticism around the world, we would need to come together as brothers and sisters in the human family and learn the art of cultivating peace. He understood the potential for collective meditation practice to help transform the alienation and loneliness of the modern world. His retreats grew from groups of tens of people to international gatherings of thousands.
We have offered so many retreats of mindfulness everywhere, and a miracle of reconciliation always takes place in our retreat. We learn how to listen to our own suffering. We learn how to look at the suffering of the other person. We suffer less after 4 days of practice.
After 39 years of exile, Thick Nhat Hanh was finally given permission to return to his homeland. Over the course of 3 visits, he led thousands of people in mindfulness retreats and ceremonies of healing to transform the suffering of the millions who died on both sides of the war. He established Thick Nhat Hanh Monastery, where his teaching became a beacon for a whole generation. But the growth of his popularity sparked fear. After 4 years, the government closed the monastery and forcibly disbanded the 400 young monastics. His students found refuge in Thailand, and Thick Nhat Hanh's influence in Asia continued to grow. He was invited to address crowds of over 10,000 in Hong Kong, Korea, and Taiwan. Despite making no effort to seek renown and declining media interviews, the Zen master's reputation grew rapidly.
We learned a lesson taught by the Venerable Thick Nhat Hanh, who said, "In true dialogue, both sides are willing to change." In this way, the very war that had divided us became a source for healing.
He was invited to teach at global parliaments, the Vatican, the World Bank headquarters, Google, and to groups of international CEOs. His model for mindfulness in education is now being practiced all over the world. The United Nations chose his code of global ethics, the 5 mindfulness trainings, as the foundation for a non-sectarian ethical path for humanity.
The way out is in. Go back to oneself and take care of oneself. Learning how to generate a feeling of joy, learning how to generate a feeling of happiness, learning how to handle a painful feeling, a painful emotions, listening to the suffering, allowed understanding and compassion to be born and suffer less.
In his 89th year, Thick Nhat Hanh suffered a major stroke. Undaunted, his spirit undiminished by physical adversity, he did not give up on life or his vision for the future. He chose to use the last chapter of his life to return to Tu Hieu Temple in Vietnam and connect his global following with their roots. Thick Nhat Hanh's legacy can be seen in the hearts of the millions of people he has touched through his retreats, his books, and his talks. People who have learned to transform their anger, fear, and despair.
It's my conviction that we cannot change the world if we are not capable of changing our way of thinking, our consciousness. That is why collective change in our way of thinking, our way of seeing things is very crucial. And all of us can help promote that. Our task is to come together and try to produce that kind of collective awakening.
He has shown that by forming communities of resistance, we can live more simply and happily, counteracting consumerism and individualism, and that it is possible to make the 21st century a century of community and solidarity, of brotherhood and sisterhood.
And there are many ways in order to bring about that kind of collective awakening and change. And that is why to learn to change our way of daily life so that there is more mindfulness, more peace, more love is very urgent. And we can do that beginning now, today. When you wake up and you see that the earth is not just the environment. The earth is in you. You are the earth. You touch the nature of interbeing. At that moment, you can have real communication with the earth. We know that many civilizations in the past have vanished, and this civilization of ours can vanish also. We need a real awakening, a real enlightenment. We have to change our way of thinking and seeing things, and this is possible. And our century should be a century of spirituality. Whether we can survive or not depends on it.